We are joined today by Pervez Amirali Hoodbhoy, a professor of eminence from Pakistan, and to have a conversation around Pakistan, origins, identity, and future, the book, but also more than the book. Uh, Asia Sensemaker is an informal conversation with a seminar-like quality, keeping in mind that we are a think tank which is affiliated to a university in India, but interested in trying to understand the cross currents of topics of relevance across Asia. With this, I would like to formally welcome Professor Hoodbhoy and a small introduction. For Professor Hoodbhoy really needs no introduction, but this is my job as a moderator today. Pervez Amirali Hoodbhoy is a Pakistani nuclear physicist, essayist, and national security analyst who lives in Islamabad. He taught at the Quaid-e-Azam University Physics Department for 40 years before becoming a distinguished professor of physics and mathematics at Forman Christian College, University in Lahore. Dr. Hoodbhoy graduated from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with undergraduate degree in electrical engineering and mathematics, a master's in solid state physics, and a PhD degree in nuclear physics. He's held visiting professorships at MIT, Carnegie Mellon University, and the University of Maryland, and in 2003 was invited to the Pugwash Council for a 6-year stay. He's a sponsor of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist and a member of the Permanent Monitoring Panel on Terrorism of the World Federation of Scientists. Professor Hoodbhoy is a recipient of many, many awards: the IERE Baker Award for Electronics in 1968, the Abdus Salam Prize for Mathematics in 1984, the UNESCO Kalinga Prize for the Popularization of Science in 2003, the Joseph A. Burton Award in 2010 from the American Physical Society, and the Jean Mayer Award from Tufts University in 2011. He was included in the list of 100 most influential global thinkers by the Foreign Policy magazine. From 2013 to 18, he was made a member of the UN Secretary General's advisory body on disarmament. Dr. Hoodbhoy is a prolific author, writer, and essayist, as I've already indicated. His most recent book is Pakistan, Origins, Identity, and Future, but a book that predated it was Islam and Science, Religious Orthodoxy and the Battle for Rationality. In the middle, he has also written a book called The Battle for Rationality, but after that, he wrote a book, I think, Trust Me, I'm a Scientist, if I'm not getting the name wrong, although I might be.
No.
Okay, no. Sorry. He has also made programs and anchored series on Pakistan's education system. And he's the head of Mashal Books in Lahore, where he heads a major translation effort to produce books in Urdu that promote modern thought, human rights, and emancipation of women. For these and other activities that he has done, the University of British Columbia conferred upon Professor Hoodbhoy the degree Doctor of Laws honoris causa in the year 2019. With this introduction, Professor Hoodbhoy, a warm greeting and welcome to this conversation today. We'll be, so.
Oh, that's a very kind introduction. It could have been much shorter. Thank you.
Right. So we now get into the conversation. We jump right into it. And one of the vexing questions across the spectrum has been that Pakistan, the state, was created to meet certain ideological demands, or rather theocratic demands, and then it decided to become a secular state. 76 years later, Pakistan is still in the middle of a crisis of character. How do you see this evolution of the idea of Pakistan? Because you've written a book which takes a very, very, very long view. So first and foremost, what exactly is the idea of Pakistan today?
Well, let me take the short view because the long view will take a long time. The idea that there are two nations on the Indian subcontinent, Hindu and Muslim, and these are the only two nations that exist over there, and that although they have lived on that subcontinent for a very long time, yet they have lived in perpetual conflict. That's the idea between the two-nation theory, which demands that the two be separated. Now, this was both articulated on the Hindu side with Veer Savarkar, and on the Muslim side by Muhammad Iqbal and by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Now, this is what was behind the creation of Pakistan, that Hindus and Muslims cannot live together. And so Pakistan came about in 1947. But the question really is, what was Pakistan to be beyond a place, a new state for Muslims? When Jinnah was asked this question, he would always parry the question. He would say, it's too early to ask. Let's get the land and then we will decide. In fact, he was very adamant about it. And those students at Aligarh Muslim University who kept badgering him for an answer, they were then put down by Jinnah as enemies of Pakistan. Now, there was, of course, a reason for this, because if Jinnah had committed to one version of Pakistan as opposed to another, he would have lost support. So it was a political statement, but this had long-term consequences. Pakistan did not start off with a vision. Now, that is something that will be denied by most Pakistanis. But if one looks at the evidence, Mr. Jinnah never wrote a book. He never wrote a position paper. He never wrote a draft constitution. In fact, the only things that we have left over from those times, are his speeches. But his speeches go sometimes in one direction and sometimes in the other. There's his very famous speech of the 11th of August, 1947, where he says, you can go to your temples, you can go to your mosques. This has got nothing to do with the business of the state. And yet one can find other statements of his which very clearly go in the direction of Pakistan being an Islamic state. Now, of course, we know that Jinnah was not a person of strong religious principles. In fact, he was unaware of the Islamic texts. He never quoted from them. He might have been seen praying, but that was only for purposes of demonstration rather than purposes of faith. And he could not even speak any local language, not Urdu, not Gujarati, which was his mother tongue. He spoke only English. So it was a paradox that Pakistan was created by a man who was, in personal terms, secular, non-religious, and yet it was created on the slogan that Islam is in danger. That, I think, led that absence of vision has made Pakistan struggle to find direction.
Thank you for this, sir. Building on it, one of the things that catches one's eye in your book and your conversations about the book is the use of the term the Praetorian state. You have termed Pakistan as a Praetorian state. When you go back in history and you look at the sheer character of people on both the sides, India, Pakistan, which had East Pakistan as well, lawyers, mostly landowners in Pakistan. How did it come to be that within a very, very short span of time, in the case of Pakistan, within 11 months, the army started exerting such a huge influence? And today, the army in Pakistan, and I think you wrote an article about it as well on 26th of August, 2023, about various checkpoints that you encounter within your own country. How is it that army has controlled the narrative, controlled the sheer force of history and has become this large presence in the politics of Pakistan, in the economy of Pakistan, in the education of Pakistan, and if you would not mind my saying so, in controlling the fate of Pakistan.
A small correction first. I don't think it was 11 months. I think it was quite a bit later. The first time that the army was called out was in 1953, and this was because of riots against the Ahmadis in Lahore. But yes, you are completely right that at the very beginning, the army was very much there. And Jinnah was aware of that. In fact, he went to Quetta sometime, just some months after 1947, to give the officers, the Pakistan Army officers, a warning that I am in control, the civilian government will be in control, so you will have to obey what we say. With Mr. Jinnah's death, the Muslim League essentially fell apart. It took 2 years for the entire organization to dissipate, and between 1948 and 3 years later, 52 until 52, there was something like 6 prime ministers. Why was the Muslim League so weak? Well, because Pakistan basically didn't have an idea. The Muslim League was constituted essentially of big landlords, men who had little education, even if they had degrees. There were a few traders, a few industrialists, but by and large, it was the big landlords, the Vaderas, the Zamindars, the Khans, and they had only one thing in mind, which is to grab, grab, and grab. So this is why the army, which was the only organized modern force at the time, felt it could easily step in. And so after a series of intrigues that went on until 1958, well, that's the first martial law, General Ayub Khan takes over and then doesn't leave until, well, East Pakistan is no longer a part of Pakistan. So the reason that Pakistan is a Praetorian state, in a nutshell, is that it was only one organized modern force, organized by the British for its own interests to keep the natives at bay. That force was then used against the people of Pakistan. And over time, it has consolidated itself.
Right, sir. My assertion with the 11-month timeline was, in your book, you draw a very interesting, it's something that I've not read earlier. I'm not a scholar of Pakistan. So Maulana Maududi, I hope I'm getting the pronunciation right.
Yes.
Maulana Maududi refused to, when the excursion happened in Kashmir by the Pakistani army under Jinnah's leadership, and Jinnah called it jihad. If you have referred to this, and Maulana Maududi refused to call it jihad because Maulana Maududi did not really believe that Pakistan is a secular state. And he also said that Muhammad Ali Jinnah was no leader, was no Islamic leader, and jihad could only be called by an Islamic leader. Consequently, he was labeled as sort of an enemy of Pakistan. And then, you know, the Pakistani army kept on getting strengthened. But to go back to this question once more, does the Pakistani army not see in itself, in the Indian myth, there is this myth of Bhasmasur, you know, this such a powerful being that cannot be killed by anybody except by itself or himself. So Bhasmasur can only die if Bhasmasur were to place his hand upon himself, and that's how he eventually dies. isn't this Praetorian Guard, isn't this large armed forces in this military industrial complex coming very close to the brink of collapse?
Okay, too many issues over here. Let's go back, disaggregate them, okay?
Sorry.
So you talked about Maulana Maududi, a very interesting character, one who is now, I'd say, perhaps one of the most influential Islamists in the world, in spite of having died 50 years ago. Born in Hyderabad, your Hyderabad, he opposed Pakistan tooth and nail on Islamic grounds. Because you see, Islam doesn't call for a state with territorial boundaries. Then he had beef with Jinnah, because Jinnah, he said, was a man who was not Islamic. His ways were not Islamic. And so he despised Jinnah. And in fact, he called him Kafir-e-Azam instead of Qaid-e-Azam, as was done in those days. But when he came to Pakistan, of course, he changed, and he was all for Pakistan, but he was against the Pakistan's army foray into Kashmir. He said, this cannot be jihad, because jihad can only be declared by the ruler of an Islamic state, and Pakistan is not an Islamic state. So he was put in jail, and then he was released, and then came back, became the leader of one of the major leaders of the agitation against the Ahmadis. Something like 2,000 Ahmadis were killed in 1953, and he was sentenced to death, but then released. So that is Maududi's story. As far as the army believing that it was undefeatable, and that it could, the only power that could kill it would be itself, I don't know really if that is the ethos of the army. They did take a very big beating in 1971, remember, that should have brought them around from this point of view. But the reason they grew was, as I said, there was no competition. And today, well, they control much of Pakistan. They decide all the big matters. They're into business, into industry, into insurance, making ice cream, whatever. Real estate is what they excel in. So every place you see defense housing societies. I'm sorry, what was the next part of your question?
So my question, sir, is that Pakistani army has become, so in the book, and you've talked about it in other places as well, in 1998, Pakistan and India both become nuclear states. In 1999, we have a young upstart Pakistani general who then went on to become the military ruler of Pakistan, deciding that it was a good time to get into India. Does it not kind of foreshadow the kind of short-term thinking of the Pakistani army? Because both the states are nuclear states. Where does this idea come from that let's get into their state? Because we are a nuclear state, they will not use nuclear weapons on us. And we have come close to this, this mutually assured destruction. And in case of Pakistan, a completely assured destruction, because it is, compared to India, a tiny state. So where is this lack of reasoning in this huge edifice of Pakistani army coming from? This is what I was skirting around, but now I'm asking you this upfront.
Well, look, this is the kind of hubris that nuclear weapons endow onto any army. Even if you have a few of them, they can cause unacceptable damage on the other side. Pakistan at the moment has maybe 170, 180 nuclear weapons. India has about the same. If these weapons, even if these weapons don't find their targets on cities, the amount of damage they can do is enough to just make radioactive ruins of both countries. Absolutely. So it is such a big cost that it gave rise to adventurism. General Musharraf thought that with the nuclear umbrella, he could send Pakistani troops disguised as mujahideen into Kargil, that they would scale the peaks from where the road from Srinagar to Leh would be just within view. And, well, they'd have a grand time picking off the enemy. But then what after that? What they did not anticipate, and this is, what can I say? It was utter stupidity. They didn't anticipate what would happen after that. And of course, there was Indian use of air power, precision artillery, and ultimately storming the heights. And so General Musharraf's recklessness brought our two countries to the brink of war, of nuclear war. But you know what? He did realize that he had made a mistake. And so 2003, 2004, we had 2004, I think, we had Prime Minister Vajpayee coming to Lahore. And then again, we had then a possibility of India and Pakistan getting along. And so the time that so between 2005, 2006, the negotiations that were going on between India and Pakistan were bringing peace to Kashmir. The idea was that, all right, we need to now soften the line of control. We need to have trade, exchange of people, stop firing guns. And Musharraf actually proposed, and this was incredible, he proposed that plebiscite was no longer necessary as a condition for peace between India and Pakistan. Now, it's amazing that he did that. In fact, Radio Pakistan refused to broadcast it. It was there in the newspapers. The army presumably was not very happy about it. But yes, this is what Musharraf said, the author of Kargil.
Thank you, sir. That's an incredible insight. But if I might just have one last question on the Pakistani army and the Pakistani deep state, if you will. Right after Pervez Musharraf makes this statement and tries very hard, the assassination attempts on the president of Pakistan, a former general of the army, increase. I don't have the facts and figures, but I remember those were the days there were incredible attempts on getting rid of Mr. Musharraf. So, and fingers were pointed, as they are often pointed, towards the underbelly of the Pakistani army, the intelligence services, so on and so forth. What makes the Pakistani army so resistant in curbing their extracurricular activities in Jammu and Kashmir by funding by funding insurgency, essentially?
A bit of correction on that. Okay, a bit of context for what you've said.
Absolutely.
We had 9/11, that's 2001. Earlier on, Pakistan was fully supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan. Thereafter, when George W. Bush put a gun to Musharraf's head, figuratively speaking, Musharraf said, "I'm not with the Taliban, I'm with you." And so Pakistan formally changed sides. It did not fully do so, but it partially did. And this caused a new enemy to emerge, and that was the Taliban and all the other Islamist groups that had come to help bring the Islamic revolution to Afghanistan. Now, within the Pakistan army, there were also groups which had the Islamic vision, and they might have been complicit in trying to get Musharraf assassinated. But it was principally the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and the other groups that existed at that time, the Uzbeks and the Turkmenistanis, that were actually engaged against the Pakistan army then. In terms of the attitudes within the Pakistan army, so at the time of the British, there was the Indian and Pakistani officers were essentially the same people. They would hang out together, have their drinks in the evening. So then comes 1947. Those habits don't go away. In fact, they didn't go away until General Ziaul Haq came along, and then a cultural rift started to happen between those who were the drinking sort and those who were not. Thereafter, the Pakistan army became much more socially conservative. And then the extreme Islamic elements under General Hamid Gul, they started to assert themselves, and they are the ones who were principally opposed to Musharraf and his so-called moderate Islam. So he called for enlightened moderation, a new version of Islam that would be away from extremism and so forth.
But that's still a conversation which is, let's say, in progress in parts of Pakistan. This brings me away from the question of Pakistani army as we've been talking about till now. And now Pakistan is a nuclear state. India is a nuclear state. Pakistan has been undergoing crucial electricity problems. What is stopping the Pakistani state from exploring nuclear power as a credible source for tapping? They have the potential. Why not tap uranium-based resources for actually generating electricity and kickstarting the economy? I mean, but the news that one hears about during the summer, electricity crisis is a recurring theme. As a nuclear physicist, I wanted your opinion on this specifically.
Oh, I think the answer is very simple, because nuclear power is extremely expensive and has a very long gestation period, 10 years or so to make a nuclear power plant. Plus, Pakistan does not have the expertise to make nuclear power plants. It can make bombs. Bombs are far, far simpler than nuclear power plants. And the 5 nuclear power plants that we have today, 6 actually, all 6 have been given by China. And they're very expensive. And we are trying to buy a 7th one, but don't have the money. Furthermore, these plants take 10 years to make. It's far too long a time. The much easier option, in my opinion, is solar, wind, water.
Absolutely, any of these.
And yeah, and that's the way that most countries are going, and Pakistan is also going, except it's not going fast enough in that direction. To my mind, nuclear power is now, look, it had promise back in the 50s when we didn't know what it was really all about. Now that we do know what nuclear power entails, it's not such an attractive option for most countries in the world, even in the United States, which was the originator of nuclear power.
Right. My question was specifically around the fact that there seems to be a short-sightedness when it comes to economy, the society, and this brings me to the next question. This was also something that I was very keen to get your view on. Education and brain drain, but you have coined a very interesting new term, brawn drain, where you say that most of the people who are getting visas to go out of Pakistan, a sizable number, almost 250,000 people, they are going to do low-level jobs. So what would be left in Pakistan? Why is it that the education of Pakistan seems to not really progress, seems to miss most of the major checkpoints? You have a Harvard, or you had a Harvard-educated education minister who did not really do much for education except bringing in a curriculum framework which was 11th century in its mindset. What's the problem there?
This is a tragic mistake which the Pakistani state made quite early on. And this was at the time of General Ziaul-Haq, where education was seen as a means of creating an Islamic polity in which education was not for enlightenment, but for propaganda. And the Islamization of education afflicted everything, including science, mathematics, biology, whatever. As a consequence of that, Pakistan's education dropped in quality. And apart from the tiny bit which is linked with Britain, it's the O levels, A levels, the local education system was hopelessly inadequate for meeting the challenges of the present times. That's the reason why you see so few Pakistanis who are in faculty positions in the United States or Britain or elsewhere. Our universities, our local universities, are not very good at all. And the kind of skills that they give are not employable skills. Therefore, when our people migrate to the Middle East, 90% of them are in low-level jobs. So they are drivers and cooks and carpenters and electricians and so forth. Very few are professors, engineers, technicians, doctors, managers, and so forth. That has made a big difference, and Pakistan has essentially compromised its future by giving this kind of education to its people.
Professor, this also brings me to the fact that wherever you've had the concept of a Praetorian state or a garrison state or in low and middle income countries, armed forces serve a twofold purpose. One, they take people who are capable but might not have the resources to be trained very well. They bring them into the fold of a formal structure, and there is an upward mobility. Armies across the world are examples of this. And Pakistani army also for a very, very long time. In fact, if I remember correctly, Pervez Musharraf in his biography says that Pakistani army was responsible for him learning management principles and discipline and so on and so forth. The quality of leadership in the Pakistani army and the quality of leadership depends on the formal training within the Pakistani army. You think the formal training that Pakistani army used to give is slipping, and that is leading to bad decisions?
I have no first-hand knowledge of that because I've been banned from the National Defense University for quite a long time. I used to go there before to lecture. But I would say that the quality of there probably has not slipped as much as in the public universities.
Right.
They do have to keep up with weapon systems. They do. The ones that I've met seem aware of technical principles rather well. I can't give a good answer to your question.
Right.
I'm sorry.
No, no worries, sir. This is just a. uh, you have highlighted quite a few threats to Pakistan. And one of the threat that you highlight is climate change. It's a threat, it's a global threat. Uh, when I was going through the economy of Pakistan, when I was trying to break down, I'm an economist by training, so I was trying to break down what is it that Pakistan sends abroad. So, of course, there is some amount of weaving products or some amount of fabrics that are exported. But in number two, it's rice. And export of rice to global places, Pakistani rice has a quality. With climate change, this rice cultivation or cotton production is going to be under severe threat. And I don't see in the subcontinent a lot of efforts that are being made to get farmers under some sort of a protection so that they're able to understand how to change the crop pattern. What happens when all of these people, these farmers who are dependent on rice and cotton production, when they have no uh, mobility, no economic play happening? I mean, what are the alternatives? So, twofold question. What are the alternatives for the Pakistani economy? And what happens from a security point of view? Because a Pakistani think tank has put out a report in July 2023, and the think tank is called Pakistan Institute for Conflict and Security Studies, PICS. They say that terrorism in Pakistan soars 79% in first half of 2023. It's all happening in areas around where there is no employment, there is tribal identity is a problem. It is not happening in areas where you have a large chunk of your labor force, young people, occupied in agriculture. What happens when this force moves away from being formally employed?
Well, that's extremely worrying. We're seeing that in parts of Pakistan, the temperature is now so high that it's now impossible. It's getting impossible to live. So places like Jacobabad in Sindh, the temperature over there reached cross 50 degrees.
50, yeah.
And at some point, life is going to become impossible over there. We've also seen that sometimes there can be an excess of water. A third of Pakistan goes underwater, as happened 2 years ago. At other times, there'll be drought. And these very serious climatic swings are not being seriously looked at by the government because, first of all, there's no government in place. Second, even if there's a government, it only really reacts to immediacies, not to long-term planning, long-term needs. And so we can articulate the problem, but I don't know what the solution is. Some private organizations have started to give advice to farmers over their smartphones about about immediate weather changes, about pests, about the right amount of fertilizer to use, times to plant, times to reap, and so forth. And I believe that they have a constituency of several million farmers just in Punjab. Now, that's the sort of thing that needs to grow, and it has to be independent of government because government is too inefficient to do to take on a task of this magnitude. There's a small fee, but I think that is something the farmers are prepared to pay. Now, that's the kind of mitigation that is possible. But in terms of the larger question, what happens if there's another such flood? What happens when the glaciers melt and are gone? there's no planning, there's no government.
Right. And so it's a fairly sad state of affairs. Um, Professor, if you, it's a question that I've had in mind for some time. It's not directly related to the book. Uh, do you think Pakistan has a problem in not recognizing its heroes? Abdus Salam, noted physicist, uh, when he was in Imperial College in London, he was a beacon not just for Pakistani students, for Indian students, for Sri Lankan students. His office was always open. This was a Nobel laureate. And yet, in Pakistan, because he is an Ahmadiyya, he gets no respect. He is an icon and he's not recognized as such. And you think this uh, amnesia emanating from religious is going to be the undoing of the state of Pakistan?
I don't know if it's going to be the undoing, but it's certainly wrong and it's certainly tragic that Abdus Salam was not recognized. And in fact, um, you can't even take his name today in well, you can take his name, but not many people will recognize it. He has not got the recognition that he deserves. Pakistan's only Nobel Prize winner in physics. He is denigrated as being a person who belongs to the wrong faith. But that's so stupid. It's, if one takes away the one single great Pakistani physicist, then where's the role model? We have no other great role models in science, leave alone physics. And this is something that my colleagues and I have reiterated for the last many decades, but to no avail, because religious fanaticism has taken over parts of the country.
So this kind of dovetails into a part of a conversation that I wanted to always have your opinion on. Pakistan has always been part of a geopolitical gambit. There is a former Indian diplomat, Narinder Singh Sarila. He wrote a very interesting book saying that the partition of India and Pakistan was not because Mr. Jinnah wanted it, was not because Illama Iqbal was for it, or it was not because the Muslim League was such a powerful force. It was because during the Cold War, the Brits really wanted a warm water port to be away from the clutches of Soviet Union. And then Pakistan became part of CENTO. Then it got into military misadventures of the United States of America. And now it is seen firmly on the side of the People's Republic of China. The Chinese are not really known for being friends. One of your presidents wrote a book called Friends, Not Masters,
Ayub Khan.
Ayub Khan. And the Chinese don't really take that view. They don't like friends. They see vassal states for what they are. Why does the Pakistani foreign policy always jump from the deep sea, from the devil into the deep sea? Like, let's put it like that.
Look, first of all, I don't think it was a British conspiracy that divided
Absolutely.
India
That's
and
a
Pakistan.
book that is
It's pretty childish to me to go to conspiracy theories. The fact is that, as far back as 200 years ago, there was a distinction between Hindus and Muslims. It was much less than in times to come. It is so whenever you have different religions, there's always likely to be some level of conflict, but that level of conflict was not high. But the difference, so I explain this in great detail in my book.
You do.
The great difference came about because of the Muslim rejection of learning and the, the Hindu grudging acceptance of learning. Grudging, I'll say. It was because of Raja Ram Mohan Roy and the Brahmo Samaj and other reformist movements that conservative Hinduism finally went in that direction. On the Muslim side, there was only Sayyid Ahmad Khan. But as a consequence of that, the differences grew under British rule. But the British, even if they did use divide and rule, weren't really the cause. They were one of the causes of the difference between Hindus and Muslims. But then came along the Congress and then the Muslim League, and then the political forces started working at it. And the Muslim League actually was very ineffective until it had a major defeat in 1937. You see, the Muslim League wanted, of course, separate India and the separation of Hindus and Muslims, but they got badly beaten in the 1937 elections. It turned out that Punjab didn't want any kind of separation. They're quite happy as they were. Sindh was quite happy as it was. It was then that Mr. Jinnah used the communal card, and he used it politically very effectively. And I would say that if Mr. Jinnah had not been around, it is quite likely that the partition of the Indian subcontinent wouldn't have happened. He was extremely effective in exacerbating the communal differences. I'd say that a good number of Muslims and Hindus, I can't give you an exact number, were perfectly happy living together. And in fact, I can tell you from my personal family that my father, a Muslim, had only Hindu friends. And he was just shattered when they left in partition. This is true for much of Sindh. So to say that it's something that partition was natural, was inevitable, is wrong.
Right, sir. But you have not answered the, if I might ask, the foreign alignments of Pakistan.
Okay. So when Pakistan comes into being, it has few resources, few educated people. Most of the industry is in India. And so Mr. Jinnah then realizes that, he's got to look around. And he, in fact, in my book, I give the interview that he gave to Anne Bork-White, who was the representative of Time Life, of Time magazine, of Life magazine then. And when she asks him, Mr. Jinnah, what are you going to do with this country which has no resources? He says, look, there's the Soviet Union and there's the United States, and we are smack in the middle. America needs us more than we need them. And that is the kind of mindset which eventually led Pakistan into the American camp, from which it gained a huge amount of money in the initial years. But then this also created that dependency. It created that euphoria, that hubris, which led to the 1965 war, thanks to Ayub Khan. And it continued and then dipped a bit. And then came 1979, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. That's when it picked up again. And until the departure of the Americans from Afghanistan in 2021, Pakistan was always hoping for more largesse from the Americans. And now that's gone. And the Chinese, as you said earlier, are not willing to pick up the slack. That's what's caused the crisis in Pakistan now. And they can't figure out what to do.
And one thing that becomes clear in just about, and you've been stressing this uh, across across the board, that Pakistan needs know-how, it needs resources, it needs a trained workforce. It did get largesse from the United States. It gets some amount of largesse from China, but it does not get the technical know-how. Why is there no interest in the non-resident Pakistani community in investing back in Pakistan? I mean, if you look at the non-resident Indians, they have been at the forefront of not just investing, they've left their jobs, come back, started companies in India. Uh, why this? And all non-resident Pakistanis love their country, but not enough to invest in it, not enough to start colleges in it, barring a few notable examples. What? So,
Well, first of all, the size of the Pakistani diaspora, the educated, highly accomplished Pakistani diaspora, is small, much smaller than that
much
of the
smaller.
Indian diaspora. And correspondingly, their impact has been also small. I do believe that they have had some effect. In fact, software companies have been started by the Pakistani diaspora here in Pakistan, various other kinds of industries, organizations, and so forth. But it's the size. The size being small means that it hasn't had that impact. Now, the diaspora cannot compensate for the smallness of the highly skilled technical class. That has to be produced by the local universities, and that's what has not been done.
And that's unfortunate because that is going to lead to greater dependence on other countries, which you have outlined in the past. A last question before I open it up to people who we've been joined by. What do you think is the future? If you were to, let's say, if I were to ask you, what do you think, what are you hopeful about in Pakistan? And what allows you or does not allow you to fall asleep peacefully at night about the future of Pakistan?
Well, look, the problems are so daunting that one has to turn off. Otherwise, it's not good for one's mental health. What am I hopeful about? Well, I see a lot of young people who don't swallow what they're being fed by the state machinery. I see a lot of anger and independent thinking. It's partly reflected in the social media, but I can't say for sure because I'm not tuned into the social media. I talk to young people directly. And I feel that they are now much more conscious and much more unwilling to go along with the narrative that's been peddled for now decades. That's the good thing. I see that the rulers have finally come to realize that this is a dead end. Now they can't figure out a way out of it. So that may be not such a positive thing. I mean, the fact is that they have a realization of the problem. They don't have a solution of the problem. What do I see as a solution of the problem? Well, first of all, we have to have peace with our neighbors, with India in particular. We've got to have trade. We've got to stop spending so much money on defense. We've got to reorient our needs towards Pakistan. We've got to put our efforts towards population control. The population is out of control. We've got to give freedom to our women. We've got to bring them, the women, into the workforce. We have to have a new constitution, one which treats all citizens of Pakistan equally, whether Muslim or Hindu or Christian or whatever. They all are equal citizens of Pakistan. That's not true under the present constitution. And we've got to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, which is enormous. I think it's pretty much the same in India, but India is a bit richer. And I don't say that it gets along, but in Pakistan, especially now with the economic crisis coming, the poor are getting trampled upon. So a lot of things need to be done to put Pakistan back onto the rails.
So that is absolutely correct. The Indian middle class keeps on expanding. Of course, there are contradictions in the Indian economy, but there are contradictions in just about every economy these days. One, I said this would be my last question, but your book is wide-ranging and very deep for being a 450-page book. One very interesting thing you bring up in the book, and I wanted to ask you about it. I'd written it and I forgot about it. So last question before I open it up. You talk about the contraceptive usage in different countries. And that was a very interesting rating that you came up with. And that really set me thinking. If I'm not wrong, and I don't have the book here in front of me, but I'm trying to get it back from my memory, Iran is something like 77%. Bangladesh is a good 60%. Pakistan, India is higher. Pakistan is somewhere very, very low. Iran is an Islamic state. It's a theocracy. Bangladesh has co-opted the usage of Maulvis on the Friday prayer meetings to increase contraceptive usage. Pakistan, which is still open to debate whether it is an Islamic state, is it a theocracy or not? What's with this low on contraceptive usage? Why are they not able to co-opt the Maulvis into population control? Because Pakistani population is a huge, huge, huge problem.
Yeah, it's what you say is absolutely right, and it's unconscionable that they should have dissolved the Ministry of Population Planning out of fear of the mullahs. But you know, the mullahs are pretty ambivalent now on population planning. The Jamaat-e-Islami, Maulana Maududi's Jamaat-e-Islami,
yes,
it used to have in its election manifesto no population planning, no restriction on population increase. But it doesn't have that anymore. And
yes.
so I am utterly puzzled why this state is so bloody lazy in this matter. What I do see now is, what I do hear is advertisements on FM radio saying, "Do bache khushhal gharana, do bache, do se zyada nahi." Okay, fine. So at least they're doing something now, but it's very little, and they should have done it much, much earlier.
That is absolutely true. There are many other questions, but I have people who want to ask you questions. One request which I've made to you in the past as well: your book is deep, incisive, and needs a much farther and a much bigger audience than it is getting right now. You are the author, you have the copyright of the book. Please have the book translated, or if you would want, we're more than happy to have the book translated so that it reaches an audience bigger than it is reaching currently in the English language. With this, sir, I'm now going to be opening up the floor for questions. Anybody who has questions, please ask to Professor Sir.
Amogh, can I ask a question?
Please, sir.
So, sir, this was a really very insightful discussion, and I actually came to learn a lot of new things which I never knew. So, thank you very much for doing this for us. My question was that going back to the first question that Amogh had presented to you about Mr. Jinnah, that if he didn't know the local language, he was also not seen as devout Muslim by many. Then where did he draw that kind of following? And why did Muslims in mass uh, almost revered him and followed him so much, and still continue to do so, and still he is considered even now a god in Pakistan. So, what explains that? Because, for example, Gandhi, Nehru, others had things going which could explain their popularity in the time when there was no TV and almost no access to radio. But why Jinnah?
That's a very good question. I suspect that if Jinnah had been an Orthodox Muslim, he would have lost his appeal with the masses, with the Muslim masses of India. Because if he had been Orthodox, he would have had to subscribe to one or the other, one of the many, many different sects of Islam. And the sects of Islam have never gotten along well with each other. I don't mean just the Shia and the Sunni, but within the Sunni, there are countless divisions. So there's the Barelvis and the Deobandis, and there's the Ahle Sunnat, etc., etc. Suppose he had belonged to one of them. Well, he would have then only those would have stood with him. So the fact that he was seen as Muslimish actually went in his favor. Anything more would have been divisive. Remember that he was onto one track only. His single track was, we can't live with Hindus. We can't live with Hindus. Is very strange, because he was not a sectarian person personally. Remember that he married a Parsi woman. He didn't really have friends, but he would socialize with everyone, including Hindus. And so it was, see, the man was a genius, political genius. And he had such a great understanding of people's psyche. He knew it didn't matter one damn bit that he was not seen as an Orthodox Muslim. But he said, I can use their fears. The fear was that when the British would leave, the Muslims would be overcome by the majority of Hindus.
But the fact remains that if you just combine, say, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, probably the proportion of Hindus and Muslims would be still 50-50, right? Because India has about 20% Muslims, and both Bangladesh and Pakistan have almost 95% Muslims. So probably, maybe marginally Hindus would be higher, but among Hindus also there are Sikhs and various sects, right?
Yeah, but they're small. So at the time of partition, before partition, it was like 3-1. So 3 Hindus to 1 Muslim.
Okay.
But it became much worse for Muslims after that. Today, Muslims are spread in 3 different countries: Pakistan, India, Bangladesh.
Okay.
Do we have We have a question, sir, for you that vision of Pakistan, how right is it to say that since there are not many written records or speeches of Mr. Jinnah, was the idea to have a separate nation for Muslims not enough to qualify as a vision during the initial stages? A vision which might have had might underline of developing into an Islamic state. It's from a young colleague of ours uh, here in Asia.
So uh, if one looks at Jinnah's speeches, he used Muslim state and Islamic state interchangeably. Now, those two are very different. A Muslim state is one where the majority of people are Muslim. An Islamic state is one which is run by Islamic law. Now, Jinnah used the two interchangeably because he didn't even know the difference. He was so little read, so he had so little understanding of what an Islamic state was that he never clarified. He never said which Islamic principles would be used in the state that he was going to make. And so it was this ambiguity which existed at the time of Pakistan, and which then General Ziaul Haq, 30 years later, tried to resolve by saying that henceforth Pakistan is an Islamic state, not a Muslim state. So I'd say that it was Jinnah had no particular thing in mind, or even if he had a thing in mind, it was unarticulated, ambiguous, and he thought that over time things would work out. And anyway, he was pretty confident that people, after a while, they'll forget that they're Muslims or Hindus, and they'll just think of themselves as Pakistanis.
Right. That has not really happened. We have another question from a very erudite scholar of West Asia and Asia in general, Dr. Shubda Chaudhary. And the question is, what is Pakistan's view, in your opinion, to the growing bilateral ties between India, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, especially in the context of India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, or an alternative to China's BRI? And Pakistan seems to be wedded to the idea of China's BRI.
Yeah, so there's a bit of dismay over here, obviously, that Saudi Arabia in particular and UAE, both of which are Pakistan's very close allies, are now forming this trade corridor with India. And this is seen as further marginalization of Pakistan in international affairs. It is that, but there's not very much that Pakistan can do. It cannot protest it. It cannot tell the Saudis that, look, what you're doing is hurtful to us, because after all, we are waiting for Saudi money. So therefore, I'd say that Pakistan is now, in terms of international relations, at a very low point, a point that it's never been before.
Just to add to this, in the last 10 years, the Indian foreign policy, especially in West Asia, has become very, very successful. It has created, it's a place where it has now found its feet and it's now running. Is this not seen? I'm just adding to Dr. Chaudhary's question, and I'm more curious about the fact, is it not seen that the Pakistani foreign policy apparatus, controlled as it is by Mr. Bhutto, has failed? Apart from some quips that they have made, the Pakistani foreign policy has no real feet.
Look, foreign policy is can be made, and an assertive policy can be made when one has the means, when one has the clout for that. But Pakistan's clout has essentially disappeared after the Taliban victory in Afghanistan. And today it does rely on Chinese largesse, but China and Pakistan have a rather transactional relationship, and it doesn't go beyond that. So the fact is that the Pakistan Foreign Office, the Foreign Ministry, doesn't have a lot of leeway in which to do things. So, as I said earlier, Pakistan foreign policy doesn't have many gateways at the present time.
Right. So adding on to the list of questions that I keep on getting is increasing. So there is a question, it's a very interesting question. My young colleague Shipra, who looks after health in Asia, is asking, with so many social issues prevailing in Pakistan, such as unemployment, economic instability, poor health infrastructure, how is the population coping up with their mental health? What is the status? I presume she's talking about mental health infrastructure and kind of a prevalence of some kind of a survey about mental health, coping, and well-being.
Mental health, I think, is an issue in the big cities, rather, and not so much in small towns or villages where much of the population lives. Urban crowding has produced a situation where people are living together in very cooped up spaces. I see the same situation, of course, in India, where the big towns are incredibly crowded. Mental health, well, what do people do for mental health? They go to peers, they go to shamans, and it's a bad situation there.
Right. There's no concurrent policy around it in any way, shape, or form.
Even if there's a policy, what do you do to implement it?
Right.
More than mental health, physical health. The number of hospitals is not adequate for the size of the population, and even more, nutrition. Nutrition is such that young children are stunted. Their mental growth is hampered by the fact that they don't get enough to eat. And so all of these problems are very much there. In terms of a solution, I don't think anyone can, any government has even the resources to do it, unless, of course, there's a massive reorientation of priorities.
Right. So there is an addition to the question. It's also mixed with an observation from Dr. Chowdhury again. Just wanted to add, way back in 2016, we were 3 Indians selected for a conference in Islamabad on gender studies. We applied for the visa. In the embassy, I saw several Sikhs getting visas for pilgrimage. Ultimately, we didn't get the visa after a wait of 7 to 8 days. It was cancelled by the military. Do you have any idea of any latest travel of Pakistanis to India or vice versa in the recent years?
No, I'm afraid not. But I did have a couple of Indian friends visit Islamabad and Lahore, but they had contacts. See, everything works through contacts. And if you know people, you can get the visas. I want to get a visa to go to India very much, but I don't have the contacts.
So we should work on getting you here this stage. I have a question from a young security researcher, Shashi Rai. He begins, it's a pleasure to listen to you, sir. For any new nation born, nation building and state building is a simultaneous process, keeping Balochistan in mind, the largest province territory-wise, which is mineral rich, while Baloch, as ethnic minority, how are they being seen to be integrated into mainstream Pakistan, even after so many years of independence?
There's obvious resentment in Balochistan, which is why you have such a heavy army presence over there. I went to Gwadar just at the beginning of this year, and the whole thing looks like a military cantonment. It's plus you see that on the hills you have guard posts and machine guns, and everywhere there are checkposts. I've written about this very recently as well. In Balochistan, there is resentment because they were not consulted in many essential matters. First, the use of natural resources. They feel that they should be getting much more than they did. After all, natural gas was discovered first in Pakistan, in Balochistan, but reached Baloch villages, towns at the very end. It's also true that major mineral deposits have been outsourced. Their mining has been outsourced to international organizations, and the Baloch are not satisfied with the way it was negotiated. They are also resentful of the restrictions on their movement. And this is particularly true in Gwadar, which is the deep water port where the Chinese are going to base their navy. So all in all, the Baloch are not happy at all. There's been an insurgency that's been simmering now for, 4 Baloch wars have been fought, and the insurgency there continues to simmer.
Right. Thank you, sir. Venkat, you had a question. Please go ahead.
Good morning, Professor Pervez. I'm Venkat. I had a question. Pakistan launched its first space rocket in 1962, first sounding rocket. That is 1 year before India launched its first rocket. Mm-hmm. But if we look today, Indian space capabilities are much higher. So what has kept Pakistan's space program so behind?
Yeah, you're talking about the sounding rockets, the meteorological rockets that were launched in 1962. I believe the same kind was used by India. They were both of American origin. But then the Indians went ahead much faster. And I think I've mentioned that earlier, that it all comes from a higher quality of education and a higher quantity of education. So education is something that has been not understood. Its importance has not been understood by the Pakistani state. The quality, it required a huge amount of effort. That effort was not put in. And today, the task has been made difficult by the fact that we have a large quantity, but we don't have good quality.
Thank you, sir. There are some more questions that keep on coming for you, sir. As I tell you, we need to do another session on this if you have some time. I have a question from another colleague of mine who looks at health program. So is there a problem of vaccination hesitancy among the people of Pakistan? The scope of immunization coverage. Also bearing in mind that for capturing Osama bin Laden, the Americans launched a door-to-door vaccination campaign / a bunch of other things, which has put off some people from vaccination, and that is causing problems? This is my addition, not on the original question.
I'd say there's much less vaccine hesitancy here than in the United States.
That is true.
There has been fear of polio, of the polio vaccine as causing infertility. And many polio workers have been killed, but that's in an isolated part of Pakistan, in the tribal areas. By and large, I would say there is not vacuum hesitancy in the cities and in the towns.
Right. So I have a question from another young colleague of mine who looks at behavioral economics. She has two questions, Farheen Yusuf. So her question is that, thank you for the insightful session, sir. I have two questions that I would appreciate your thoughts on. You mentioned the role of peace as a solution. Do you believe that education can serve as a bridge by their foreign policy to help achieve this goal, and is there any willingness? Secondly, I'm curious about the level of disillusionment among the younger generation in Pakistan. Could you share your insights on this matter?
Well, peace, extremely important. And I think that Pakistan at this point is ready for peace. I'm not sure that India is. India is in a state of hubris. It feels that Pakistan now is so far down that nobody needs to worry about it. I don't think that's a good attitude to take. I think that the fact is that we live on contiguous pieces of land. The sooner we patch up, the better. As far as the level of disillusionment goes, I think it is pretty widespread among the young people, among the working class in this country. And as inflation goes up, and just today, the price of petrol has increased by 15 rupees. So there is now a lot of looking within and asking what went wrong. So introspection is ultimately what brings consciousness. And I'm hopeful that in time this will increase, and that the establishment, the military establishment and the political establishment won't be able to do what they've been doing for decades.
Right, sir. You make an insightful comment. I think the Indian side also wants peace, but the problem is that the bleed India by a million cuts policy seems to be
1,000, just 1,000.
Sorry. Just 1,000. Okay. I thought with inflation it has gone up.
No.
Okay. So that policy is to stop. Just day before yesterday, there was another excursion into the Indian Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir. So I think that's the problem for a lot of people on the Indian side. I have another question, which is...
But hang on. I think that organized jihad has pretty much stopped now for many years. It used to be completely visible, then it went invisible. Now I think it is gone. FATF killed it. The Pakistan army has, from what I hear from them, has pretty much understood that it's a failed idea. Now, if there's been an excursion yesterday or day before, I don't know about it, but isolated things like that may happen, but they're not part of they're not part of any systematic effort, as used to be the case.
If I was a newspaperman, you have given me a headline, but since I am an academician, I am going to use this. But I think I agree with you. But still, to get the process of peace is a process that both the sides have to come on a table. I have a question for you from one of our trustees who could not attend due to pre-arrangement. Your views on Oppenheimer, not just the film, I'm presuming, the person, and the future of quantum physics. And it's a tripartite question. What would you expect from the probe of the sun, given it's a reactor? Can the world ever move away from nuclear weapons? Sorry, it's a four-part, it's a quadra question.
Well, too many parts to it, but yeah.
Too many parts.
Oppenheimer, look, what I think his greatest scientific achievement was prediction of the black hole, of matter collapsing and then essentially disappearing into a point. His role in the atom bomb is very, very smart, of course. He headed the project. He had second thoughts about it. He didn't want to get into fusion weapons after what happened in Hiroshima. People like Edward Teller hated him, all that. Yeah, I knew people who knew Oppenheimer. They were my teachers at MIT. They thought he was a smart cookie, but didn't think of him as a very profound scientist. So that was their opinion. Can there be a world without nuclear weapons? Probably there will be, but then it'll have to be after something very terrible happens. Could happen in Ukraine, could happen in South Korea, in the Koreas, or it could happen here.
That's a it's a very sobering thought, if there is. There's also another one, a probe of the sun. Since the person is not here, I don't really understand the context.
Yeah, okay, so looking at the sun is good because you can look at solar flares, solar activity, you can see stuff coming out of that and know exactly when it's going to hit the Earth. That's important because you want to protect your satellites, and to an extent you can. The surface of the sun is, of course, all that you can study with probes like that. To study the interior needs very different methods. You need what are called neutrinos and neutrino detectors. So the sun has periods. It's got an 11-year cycle. It's rotating. It has all sorts of interesting convection and conduction cycles within it. So all that is interesting from a scientific point of view. I think this Indian, Surya, is certainly not the first. Other probes of the Earth of the sun that have gotten very close to it. It's quite a technical feat because you can't get too close to the sun, otherwise you'll just burn up. It's interesting technology, and of course, it's a natural part of space exploration.
Right. I think we are now drawing to a close. There is a final comment from a friend who heard that I'll be speaking to you. And she is a person of Pakistani origin who is an economist in Oxford. And she told me, will your book be available in Urdu? And will it be given to the orthodoxies that be in Pakistan so that they can also make sense of the conundrum of Pakistan? It's just, so will your book be available in Urdu?
You know, I would like to do an adaptation in Urdu. It's too big. It's 600 pages actually in the local edition. And I don't have the energy to do that all, but I can do a 200-page adaptation of that. At some point, I will do that.
Right. with that, sir, I hope there are no other questions from everybody. I think everybody has asked questions. We have taken a lot of your time. Thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you very much for being a voice of reason in a state that is very fast going out of reason. Thank you for
Well,
joining
thank
us.
you.
I hope to see you again very soon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.